Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into two incredibly profound and frankly, super complex psychological realities: how the mind literally severs its connection to reality just to survive, and the universally recognized, yet so often misunderstood, weight of depression. I am absolutely fascinated by this material because understanding these mechanisms isn't just about memorizing some clinical definitions from a textbook. It's really about grasping the extreme resilience and, at the same time, the fragile vulnerability of the human brain. You know, we tend to think of the brain as this supercomputer that just crunches data, but it's also a fierce, fierce protector. When it's faced with the unthinkable, it will do whatever it takes to keep the core system running, even if that means altering reality itself. We've got a great journey ahead of us, moving from the mind's ultimate escape hatches to the heavy anchor of depressive disorders. So let's just jump right in.
So think about this for a second. How exactly does the mind protect itself from overwhelming pain? We all deal with stress every single day, right? Your heart might race when you're stuck in traffic and running late, or you get that awful knot in your stomach when someone you love is sick. Those are entirely normal, functional reactions. Your brain is just processing your environment and sending you the appropriate warning signals. But what happens when that stress is so immense, so acutely traumatic that the brain simply cannot process it in a normal way? Well, it essentially breaks the glass in case of an emergency. Today, we're going to explore the extreme, yet totally fascinating coping mechanisms that our brains deploy when pushed way past their absolute limits. We're looking at exactly what happens when normal processing fails, and pure survival instinct takes the wheel.
All right, let's start with Section 1, the mind under stress, and its extreme coping mechanisms. So, dissociation. The textbook definition is the severance of the connections between ideas and emotions. But what does that actually look like in practice? Well, think of your mind kind of like a complex electrical circuit board in a house. Normally, the electricity flows perfectly smoothly, powering your memories, your emotions, and your general awareness of what's happening around you. But a massive traumatic event, that's like a catastrophic power surge. If that surge hits the system directly, it could literally burn the whole house down. So what does the brain do? Boom, it trips the circuit breaker. Dissociation is that blown fuse. It creates these sudden, temporary alterations of consciousness to literally blot out painful experiences. By cutting the connection between the emotional terror and the conscious mind, it brings on feelings of unreality, estrangement, and sometimes even a total loss of identity. It's an incredibly active, profound survival tactic, where the brain literally builds a firewall between itself and the trauma. Moving right along to Section 2, what are dissociative disorders? Let's break down the categories. According to the clinical texts, there are basically three main forms that characterize this loss, shift, or estrangement in a person's identity and reality. We've got dissociative amnesia, dissociative identity disorder, and depersonalization or derealization disorder. And listen, these aren't just arbitrary medical terms. They are three completely distinct emergency protocols your brain can initiate. Each condition represents an entirely different defense strategy to pull off that psychological severance we just talked about. While one protocol might just erase a specific memory, another might spin up a whole new identity, and the third could completely alter the very fabric of how you perceive the physical world around you. Let's break these down one by one, because the differences in how they manifest are truly fascinating. First up, we have dissociative fugue, which is a really dramatic subcategory of dissociative amnesia. Now, standard dissociative amnesia involves extensive memory loss without any physical cause, like you didn't hit your head. But a dissociative fugue takes this protective mental erasure a massive step further. The main feature here is a person undertaking completely unexpected travel away from their home and workplace, assuming a totally new identity and failing to recall anything about their previous one. Driven by just unbearable stress, the brain simply packs its bags and leaves the traumatic environment behind. And honestly, the most striking part of this, the fugue usually ends when the person just suddenly wakes up. Imagine that for a second, finding yourself in a totally strange city, wearing clothes you don't even recognize, going by a name you've never heard, with absolutely zero memory of how you got there. It is the ultimate total psychological escape. Next is dissociative identity disorder. Now, we really need to keep a grounded clinical perspective here because it's crucial to understand that what pop culture used to widely sensationalize as multiple personality disorder is, in reality, a demon's alternate personalities that may or may not even be aware of each other. And the clinical literature explicitly points out that this is almost always associated with highly traumatic, inescapable experiences in childhood, things like severe abuse.
Think about it. When a child is trapped in an environment of overwhelming pain and they literally cannot physically run away, their mind does the only thing it can. It fractures. It breaks its own identity into separate pieces just to contain the trauma, ensuring that a core self is protected and can actually survive the unbearable.
Have you ever stared at your own hands and felt, maybe just for a split second, that they weren't really yours? Or looked around a super familiar room and got this bizarre sense that you'd never been there before? Okay, now multiply that fleeting, weird feeling by about 1,000. That is the reality of depersonalization and derealization disorder. It's this intense, dreamlike state where you are separated from both your own self and from reality itself. In depersonalization, there's a huge shift in self-perception. You might feel like a robot or like you're an outside observer watching your own thoughts and body. In derealization, the external world suddenly feels profoundly unreal, distorted, or super distant. It is terrifying and incredibly disorienting. The brain, completely overwhelmed by stress, essentially unplugs your conscious awareness from your physical sensations and your environment, just leaving you floating in this detached void. All right, let's shift gears completely for Section 3, defining depressive disorders, moving from the margins to the mainstream. Now, we really have to make an important distinction here between normal depressive feelings and an actual clinical disorder. In our day-to-day lives, we throw around the word depression a lot to describe feeling sad after a big loss. You know, maybe you went through a really painful breakup, or you missed out on a huge personal goal. Feeling grief, sadness, and just a general lack of energy in response to those things, that is completely normal. It's human. But major depressive disorder is a fundamentally different and far more severe reality. It's defined as a persistent period of depressed mood or a profound loss of interest in almost all activities. But the critical thing to remember is that it is deeply physical. We're talking constant sleep problems, extreme physical agitation, and greatly slowed behavior. It is definitely not just feeling blue. It's a severe, systemic shutdown of both the body and the mind. To really grasp the massive mental and physical toll this takes, let's actually walk through what a major depressive episode looks like on a daily basis. It usually starts before you even get out of bed. You wake up feeling utterly exhausted despite sleeping for hours, or you're just staring at the ceiling battling brutal insomnia. As the day goes on, this thick mental fog sets in, making even simple thinking or basic decisions feel literally impossible. The physical symptoms are incredibly heavy. Your body might feel like you're trying to move through wet concrete, often accompanied by drastic, totally unintended changes in your body weight. You feel this profound loss of interest in everything that ever brought you joy. By the evening, a crippling sense of excessive guilt or feelings of total worthlessness just take over. It is a relentless, suffocating cycle. And tragically, in the absolute worst cases, this unbearable pain culminates in thoughts of death and suicide. Which brings us to Section 4, risk factors for depression, where we'll look at the predisposing elements. So a question a lot of people have is, why does this happen to some people and not others? Well, depression isn't just triggered by one single thing. It's a super complex interface where a bunch of different elements stack on top of each other. Think of genetics and heredity as the baseline. They kind of load the gun, creating an underlying biological vulnerability. Then you add in demographic layers. The data actually shows that women are particularly at risk during young adulthood, while for men, the risk peaks later in early middle age. But biology and demographics alone don't just automatically equal depression. It's almost always the environmental factors that pull the trigger. Experiencing severe negative life events, especially when you couple that with a lack of a strong social support network, can be the final catalyst. When you combine a genetic predisposition, a vulnerable stage of life, a devastating event, and sheer isolation, the scales finally tip and a major depressive episode takes hold. So I want to leave you with this thought. When we finally strip away the societal misconceptions surrounding these disorders, when we replace the pop culture myths with the actual clinical realities of dissociation and major depression, how does that factual understanding empower us? Grasping the true, agonizing nature of these internal battles is absolutely the first step toward genuine empathy. It allows us to recognize the signs, to truly understand the profound emotional and physical toll involved, and ultimately, it makes us so much better equipped to support the people around us who are fighting these invisible wars every single day. Thank you so much for diving into the fascinating mechanics of the human mind with me today. Keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.